I had a plan to escape the pack. One bag, a stolen map, and the cover of the new moon. What I didn't plan for was him, the alpha whose curse was a pack legend, standing at the tree line as if my desperate little secret was a destiny he'd simply grown tired of waiting for. Chapter 1. The Weight of Whispers. The scent of bleach and old grease was a permanent ghost in the pack kitchen, a smell that clung to Sera's hair and clothes long after her shift ended. She scrubbed at a scorched pot, her knuckles raw, the rhythmic scrape of metal on metal a miserable drumbeat to her life. Peace was a luxury she couldn't afford, not when every pair of eyes that slid past her held a flicker of scorn. She was the disgraced beta's daughter, a walking reminder of a betrayal that wasn't even hers. A stain. Her only real dream wasn't of a mate or a position of honor. It was the quiet, simple fantasy of a bus ticket and a town where no one knew her name. A tray clattered onto the steel counter beside her, making her jump. Lyra, whose blonde hair was always perfect, sneered down at her. Still scrubbing traitor's blood? Some of us have duties that actually matter. Sera's jaw tightened, but she kept her gaze locked on the pot. Arguing was pointless. It was like trying to reason with a snarling wolf, all instinct and no reason. Just get through the day, she told herself, a familiar, worn-out mantra. Just a few more weeks. Because of her father's alleged crimes, she was relegated to the lowest tasks, a punishment designed to be both public and perpetual. She had to save every spare coin, hiding them in a loose floorboard beneath her cot, because freedom wasn't going to be given to her. It had to be stolen. Her only friend, Elara, appeared at her side, wiping her hands on an apron. Elara had kind eyes and a fierce loyalty that baffled most of the pack. "Leave her alone, Lyra. Go polish your claws or something." Lyra scoffed, a truly ugly sound. "Protecting the weak again, Elara? You'll catch her stench if you're not careful." She sauntered away, leaving a trail of smug satisfaction behind her. "Don't listen to her," Elara murmured, nudging Sera's shoulder. "She's just bitter because no one's looked at her twice since she turned 18. She lowered her voice even more, a conspiratorial whisper that held a tremor of fear. "Have you heard the rumors about the alpha?" Sera's scrubbing paused. It was impossible not to hear them. The whispers slithered through the pack house like smoke. Alpha Kael, our powerful, terrifying leader, was cursed. His wolf, the very source of his authority, was supposedly uncontrollable. Some said he'd nearly killed a patrol guard in a fit of rage. Others whispered that he hadn't been seen in his human form for days at a time. This story was one of the many reasons her escape felt so urgent. An unstable alpha meant an unstable pack, and for someone at the bottom like her, that was a death sentence. "They say it's getting worse," Elara continued, her eyes wide. "That his wolf is fighting him for control. That it's feral." The word hung in the air, heavy and sharp. A feral wolf was a mindless killing machine. For an alpha's wolf to go feral was unthinkable, a catastrophe of the highest order. Sera's heart hammered against her ribs. She thought of the dark woods that bordered their territory, the woods she'd have to cross to get away. Elara leaned closer, her expression turning sad. "You know, your mother used to talk about old magic, curses and bloodlines. She said some lines are born with shadows clinging to them." It was a strange, almost random comment, but it pricked at Sera's memory. She barely remembered her mother, just flashes of a warm smile and the scent of wildflowers. But she knew the woman had been different, an outsider from a distant pack with strange beliefs. That was the first open loop, a thread of mystery she had no way of unraveling right now. Sera just nodded, picking up her sponge again. Talking about her mother was a pain she didn't want to touch. She had to focus on the practical, on the now. She needed to survive this place, and an alpha's monstrous curse was just another shadow to escape from. The upcoming pack meeting was mandatory, another public humiliation to endure, but it also marked one day closer to her departure. Chapter 2. The Scent of the Storm. The great hall buzzed with the nervous energy of 100 wolves crammed into one space. The air was thick, a potent cocktail of old wood, fireplace smoke, and the underlying musky scent of the pack. It was a smell that should have been comforting, a symbol of home and safety. For Sera, it felt like the inside of a cage. She and Alara found a spot near the back, behind a thick stone pillar where she could almost disappear. Her goal was simple: be invisible. Do not be seen. Do not be noticed. Do not exist. This strategy had kept her safe, if not happy, for years, because attention was a predator in these halls. A sudden hush fell over the crowd, a collective intake of breath that seemed to suck the very warmth from the room. He was here. Alpha Kael moved through the parted crowd not like a man walking, but like a storm front rolling in. He was tall, broader than any two men in the room, and clad in simple black clothes that did nothing to hide the raw power coiled in his frame. His dark hair was a little too long, brushing the collar of his leather jacket, and his face was all sharp angles and shadows. He wasn't handsome in a pleasant way. He was devastating, his features carved with a severity that promised no softness. But it was his eyes that held the true terror, a piercing golden gaze that looked like it could see right through flesh and bone to the trembling soul beneath. He took his place on the raised dais at the front of the hall, his beta, Marcus, a step behind him. Marcus looked worried, his face a mask of strained loyalty. Kael's gaze swept across his pack, and Sera felt the force of it even from her hiding spot. It was a look of pure, undiluted authority, a predator's assessment of his territory. "There are reports," he began, his voice a low rumble that vibrated through the floorboards and up Sera's spine. It was a voice that didn't need to shout to command obedience. "Rogues have been spotted near the northern border, bolder than usual. They're testing our strength." A nervous murmur rippled through the pack. Rogues were a constant threat, but his tone implied something more. "They will find our strength is not lacking," Kael continued, his voice dropping, becoming something colder, harder. "Any wolf found fraternizing with them, offering them passage, or hiding their presence—" He paused, letting the threat hang in the air. "Will answer to me, to my wolf." The final two words were punctuated by a low growl that wasn't entirely human. It was a sound from the deep, a promise of violence that made the hairs on Sera's arms stand on end. This was the curse they whispered about. It wasn't just a rumor. It was real, and it was standing right in front of them. Then, something shifted. In the middle of his speech, Kael's gaze swept past her pillar. He faltered for a fraction of a second, his head tilting as if catching a scent on the wind. His golden eyes narrowed, not with anger, but with a sudden, sharp focus. It wasn't directed at her. He couldn't possibly see her, but it was aimed at her small section of the hall. A strange, unfamiliar warmth bloomed in Sera's chest, a bizarre jolt of electricity that had no source. It felt like a string, pulling taut between her and the dais. What was that? His wolf, she realized with a spike of pure terror. His wolf sensed something. She shrank further behind the pillar, her heart a frantic bird beating against her ribs. She squeezed her eyes shut, repeating her mantra. Invisible. I am invisible. When she dared to look again, his attention had moved on, but she saw Marcus give him a subtle, questioning look. The beta knew something. He had seen that flicker of instinct in his alpha, and his expression was one of deep, profound concern, a second mystery she couldn't afford to solve. The meeting couldn't end soon enough because the air in the Great Hall no longer felt like a cage. It now felt like a trap about to spring. Chapter 3. A Destiny, written in moonlight. The night was a blanket of silent, suffocating darkness, the new moon offering no comfort. In her small, cold room, Sera moved with the quiet grace of a ghost. Every item she placed in her worn leather satchel was a brick in the foundation of her new life, a change of clothes, the small pouch of coins, her treasure, which felt impossibly light for the years of misery it represented. Lastly, she tucked in a small, smooth river stone her mother had given her. the only tangible piece of her past she was allowing herself to keep. Fear was a cold knot in her stomach, but determination was a fire in her veins. She had to do this, because staying meant slowly suffocating under the weight of everyone's hate. Slipping out of the pack house was the easy part. Everyone was asleep, their dreams no doubt filled with the alpha's chilling warnings. The forest was another matter entirely. The moment she stepped under the canopy of trees, the world changed. The air grew cooler, thick with the scent of damp earth, pine, and something wilder. Every rustle of leaves was a footstep. Every hoot of an owl was a warning cry. She moved quickly, her senses on high alert, her mind screaming at her to hurry. The pack's border was a stream, shimmering faintly in the starlight. It was a physical line and a symbolic one, the boundary between her past and her future. Freedom was so close she could taste it on the night air, a flavor of clean rain and new beginnings. She reached the bank of the stream, her breath coming in ragged puffs. Her feet sank into the soft, cold mud. Just a few more steps, just cross the water. That's when the world went silent. The crickets stopped chirping. The wind died in the trees. An unnatural stillness fell over the woods, a silence so profound it was louder than any sound. It was the hush of prey that knows a predator is near. A new scent cut through the air. Not pine, not earth, but something electric and dangerous. Ozone and dominance. The smell of a storm about to break. Her blood ran cold. She wasn't alone. Slowly, she turned, and her heart stopped. From the deepest shadows stepped a piece of the night itself. It was a wolf. No, it was the wolf. Impossibly large, a monster of myth, its fur the color of polished jet. He was a shadow made solid, a force of nature given tooth and claw, but it was his eyes that stole her breath, molten gold, intelligent and ancient, and burning with an intensity that pinned her in place. This was no animal. This was the Alpha's curse, given form. Panic was a scream trapped in her throat. Her escape plan, her dreams, everything, evaporated into sheer terror. She took a step back. Her foot slipped in the mud. The movement was all it took. The beast's head lowered, a low growl rumbling in its massive chest. It wasn't a sound of aggression so much as recognition, a deep, primal acknowledgement that resonated in her very bones. He took a step forward, and another. He wasn't hunting her. He was approaching. Run! Her mind shrieked, but her body was frozen, caught in the gravity of his presence. He was in front of her now, so close she could feel the heat radiating from his body. That scent of storm and power was overwhelming, making her dizzy. She looked into those golden eyes and saw a wild, terrifying battle being waged within them. Then he lunged. It wasn't a snarl of attack. It was a movement too fast to track, a blur of black fur and overwhelming strength. She hit the ground with a gasp, his weight a crushing force. She braced for the killing bite, for teeth tearing into her throat. Instead, a searing electric pain exploded at the juncture of her neck and shoulder. It wasn't a rip, but a brand. A bolt of lightning that shot through every nerve in her body, setting her soul on fire. A claim. A mark. Her vision flashed white, and in that blinding moment, she felt it. An unbreakable connection snapping into place. A chain forged in instinct and moonlight, binding her to the very monster she had tried to flee. The last thing she knew was the crushing weight of his presence, and then the world, her hopes, her escape, her very self, went completely dark. Chapter 4. The brand of a monster consciousness returned like a slow, painful tide. The first thing Sera registered wasn't a place, but a feeling. A deep, throbbing ache at the base of her neck, a persistent burn that felt alien and wrong. The second thing was the scent, clean linen, old leather, and a sharp masculine fragrance of pine, and something that reminded her of a looming storm. It was the smell from the forest, the smell of him. Her eyes flew open with a gasp. This wasn't the forest floor. She was in a bed, a massive one with sheets so soft they felt like water against her skin. The room was large and imposing, furnished with dark, heavy wood. A fire crackled softly in a stone hearth, casting long, dancing shadows on the walls. It was a beautiful room, a luxurious one. A cage. Panic, cold and sharp, clawed its way up her throat. She threw the sheets off and scrambled out of the bed, her bare feet hitting a plush fur rug. Her own worn clothes were gone, replaced by a simple, soft cotton shift. Where was she? The Alpha's wing. It had to be. Her gaze landed on a tall, silver-framed mirror beside the wardrobe. She approached it like one might approach a dangerous animal. Her reflection was pale, her eyes wide with terror, and there, on the delicate skin where her neck met her shoulder, was the mark. It wasn't a messy bite, but a swirl of scarred tissue, intricate and almost elegant, like a dark tattoo branded into her flesh. It was the mark of a mate, a claim, a symbol of ownership. The air behind her shifted. She spun around, her heart leaping into her throat. He stood in the doorway, no longer a monster of shadow and fur, but a man. The sight was somehow more terrifying. Alpha Kael filled the space, his presence so immense it seemed to suck all the air from the room. He was exactly as he'd been in the Great Hall, a storm contained in human form, his golden eyes watching her with an unreadable intensity. "What did you do to me?" she whispered, her voice trembling. One hand flew up to cover the mark, a useless gesture. He didn't move from the doorway. His voice, when he spoke, was the same low rumble that had vibrated through her bones before. "My wolf chose. I did not have control." "Your wolf?" she choked out, a hysterical laugh bubbling in her chest. "Your wolf attacked me, it hunted me down, and it did this." Her voice broke, pointing a shaking finger at her neck. She backed away until her legs hit the edge of the bed. Her dream of freedom, her carefully laid plans, all of it had turned to ash, because he couldn't control his own animal. "It did not attack you," he stated, the words calm and absolute, which only fueled her rage. "It claimed you. The fates have declared you my mate." "The fates?" she repeated, her voice rising. "I don't care about the fates. I care about my life, the one you just ruined. I was leaving. I was almost free." The words tumbled out, a torrent of grief and fury. This was all she had wanted, a simple escape, a quiet existence. He had stolen that. He had stolen everything. He finally moved, stepping fully into the room and closing the door softly behind him. The click of the latch sounded like a prison gate locking. "You are safer here than you have ever been." The sheer arrogance of his statement stunned her. Safer? With him? The cursed Alpha whose own pack whispered about his feral nature? She stared at him, at the hard line of his jaw and the power radiating from him, and for a split second, she saw something flicker in those golden eyes. It wasn't arrogance. It was fear. A deep, profound fear that he hid almost perfectly. He wasn't afraid of her. He was afraid for her. That realization was more chilling than anything else. He knew he was a danger. He was lying to her face, trying to pretend this was a gift from destiny when he knew it was a curse. "I reject it," she said, the words tasting like poison and power. "I reject you. I reject this bond." She pushed the words out with all of her will, a desperate attempt to sever the invisible chain she could feel linking them together. The effect was immediate and violent. A wave of nausea slammed into her, so intense her vision swam. The mark on her neck blazed with a fresh, agonizing fire. The world tilted and she collapsed onto the bed, gasping. Kael took a sharp step toward her, his hands clenched into fists at his sides, but he stopped himself. He just stood there, watching her suffer, his face a stone mask that couldn't quite hide the torment in his eyes. She was trapped, and they both knew it. Chapter 5: A Chain of Souls. The golden cage grew smaller with each passing day. Sera was a prisoner in the Alpha's lavish quarters, and the mate bond was her warden. It was a constant, humming presence under her skin, an echo of Kael's own emotions that she couldn't block out. She felt his restless energy when he was pacing in the next room, a low thrum of frustration that mirrored her own. She felt the sharp pull of his proximity whenever he was near, a magnetic force that her body wanted to yield to even as her mind screamed in rebellion. The constant fight left her exhausted and perpetually sick to her stomach, because trying to deny the bond was like trying to deny a part of her own soul. Kael, for his part, seemed to be fighting his own war. He kept his distance as much as he could, leaving trays of food outside her door, his scent lingering in the hallway long after he was gone. But the bond was a chain that connected them both, and it had a cruel, limited length. Eventually, it would pull him back. "You need to eat," he said, his voice rough. He stood in her doorway one evening, holding a tray with a steaming bowl of stew. Sera sat curled in a large armchair by the window, watching the sunset paint the sky in bruised shades of purple and orange. "I'm not hungry. Your body needs fuel," he insisted, stepping inside. "Fighting the bond is draining you." "Then stay away from me," she snapped, turning to glare at him. "It's worse when you're near." A muscle jumped in his jaw. "Do you think I want this? Being near you weakens my control. But staying away?" He trailed off, but she could feel the truth of it through their connection. The distance was agony for him, too. It was a torment designed for two. He placed the tray on a small table, his movements stiff. "This is our reality now, Sera. We can either fight it and destroy ourselves, or we can adapt." She gave a bitter laugh. "You mean I can adapt? I'm the one who was dragged here against my will." His golden eyes softened for a moment, a flicker of something that might have been regret. Without another word, he turned and left, leaving her alone with the scent of good food and the confusing echo of his pain. She hated him for his power, for his curse, for what he'd done to her. But the bond was a traitor, forcing her to feel the man beneath the monster. Later that night, unable to sleep, she heard voices from Kael's study next door. His and his beta's, Marcus. Driven by a desperate need for information, she crept to the adjoining door, pressing her ear against the thick wood. "A patrol spotted them again," Marcus was saying, his tone urgent and low. "It's definitely Riker's scouts. They're not even trying to hide. They're watching the territory." "Let them watch," Kael's voice rumbled back, full of controlled fury. "They know better than to cross the stream." "Kael, it's more than that," Marcus pressed. "One of the scouts was seen near the den. An elder saw him from the ridgeline. He said the man was watching this wing of the house. He was watching her." A cold dread, entirely separate from her fear of Kael, washed over Sera. Her? Why would a rival pack be watching her? She was nobody, the traitor's daughter, a pack outcast. Unless she wasn't nobody anymore. She was the Alpha's marked mate. A symbol. A weakness. She stumbled back from the door, her hand flying to the brand on her neck. It pulsed with a faint warmth. She looked out her window, down at the dark, sprawling forest below. The world she had so desperately tried to escape was now closing in, and the monster in the next room was no longer the only one hunting her. Chapter 6. The Alpha's Decree. The knowledge that she was being watched changed the nature of her prison. Before, it had been a cage to hold her in. Now it felt like a box to keep others out. The air in the Alpha's wing grew thick with unspoken tension. Kael was a coiled spring, his restlessness a constant agitated hum against her senses. He knew he was a danger to her. And now, because of their bond, the entire world was a danger to her too. He had to make a choice. He had to protect her from his rivals and from himself. The only way to do that was to sever the connection that made her a target. He came to her in the middle of the day. The sun streamed through the window, but he seemed to suck all the light and warmth out of the room. His face was a mask of cold, hard authority. The conflicted man was gone, and only the Alpha remained. "You're being moved," he said, his voice flat, devoid of any emotion. Sera stood up from the armchair, her fists clenching at her sides. Moved where? To the old Omega quarters, on the far side of the pack house. His golden eyes were like chips of ice. He wouldn't truly look at her, his gaze fixed on a point just over her shoulder. Her breath hitched. The Omega quarters. It was the lowest, most shameful place to live, reserved for the weak and the outcast. It was a public declaration of her worthlessness. Why? She whispered, though she already knew. He was pushing her away. This bond, he said, the word tasting like ash in his mouth. It was a mistake. My wolf was not in his right mind. The fates were wrong. A sharp, shocking pain lanced through her chest. It was absurd. This was what she wanted, wasn't it? To be free of him? So why did his words feel like a physical blow? Why did it feel like a betrayal? You marked me, she said, her voice shaking with a rage that was barely holding back a sob. You claimed me. You don't get to just throw me away. I do, he bit out, his control cracking for a single, terrifying second. A low growl underscored the words. I am the Alpha. I decide what is a mistake and what is not. He turned his back on her, a gesture of ultimate dismissal. The council has been assembled. It will be made official. They dragged her to the great hall. It was just as it had been before, filled with the same pack members, the same scent of wood and wolf. But this time, she wasn't invisible. She was the center of it all, a spectacle of shame. Lyra's venomous smirk from the crowd was a small, sharp sting in an ocean of agony. Kael stood on the dais, proud and unyielding. He looked every bit the powerful Alpha. Only Sera, through the thrumming, terrified bond, could feel the war raging inside him. He raised a hand, and silence fell. There has been an error, he announced, his voice booming through the hall. He looked directly at her then, and his eyes were filled with a torment so profound it almost brought her to her knees. My wolf, in his instability, created a bond that cannot be. It is a danger to this pack. It is a danger to our stability. He took a deep breath. She felt his soul bracing for the impact. I, Alpha Kael of the Black Moon Pack, he declared, his voice ringing with formal power, hereby reject this bond. Sera of no name is not my mate. She is not my Luna. The moment the final word left his lips, a cataclysm erupted in her soul. The bond didn't fade. It didn't dissolve. It shattered. A scream of pure, unadulterated agony ripped from her throat as a force like a physical claw tore through her insides. The world dissolved into a white-hot nova of pain. She collapsed, her body convulsing. Through a swimming, tear-filled haze, she saw him stagger on the dais. His hand flew to his own chest, his knuckles white. His face was pale, his breath coming in ragged gasps. The rejection had nearly destroyed him, too. As guards hauled her limp form away, the last thing she saw was Kael's face. The mask of the Alpha was gone, replaced by a look of raw, golden fury. It wasn't directed at her, or the pack, or the fates. It was aimed squarely at himself. He had just saved her life by utterly destroying them both. Chapter 7, Echoes of a Howl. The Omega quarters were less a home and more a wound. Located on the damp, shadowed side of the pack house, the air here tasted of mildew and quiet desperation. Unlike the Alpha's wing with its warm woods and crackling fires, this place was all cold stone and drafts that smelled of rot. Here, Sera was no longer a mystery or a scandal. She was simply trash that had been thrown out. The shunning was worse than before. Now, it was mixed with a cruel pity that felt sharper than any insult. She was the Alpha's broken toy, a thing he had claimed and then publicly discarded. Her days returned to a familiar rhythm of menial labor and averted eyes, but everything was different now, because the silence in her soul had been replaced by a constant agonizing echo. The broken bond was a phantom limb, a piece of her spirit that had been violently amputated but still screamed with phantom pains. It was a dull, persistent ache that lived behind her ribs, a hollow space that had once been filled with a terrifying electric connection. Sometimes, without warning, the ache would sharpen into a spike of pure agony. It would happen when she was washing dishes or mending clothes, a sudden stabbing pain that mirrored a distant struggle. She knew, with a certainty that made her sick, that it was Kael. It was his battle. His cursed wolf raging against its cage. And she felt every blow. Elara tried to help, smuggling her better food from the main kitchen and offering quiet words of support. "You look terrible, Sera. You're getting thinner. You have to fight this." "How?" Sera whispered, pressing a hand to her chest where the ache was strongest. "How do you fight a ghost?" This new reality was a slow, grinding torture, a parallel to her old life, but infused with a deeper suffering. Before, she was an outcast because of her father's name. Now she was a pariah because of her own. Before, she had a dream of escape. Now, she had a chain around her soul that tethered her to this misery. One afternoon, while carrying a heavy basket of laundry across the main courtyard, the world began to tilt. The dull ache in her chest flared into a raging inferno. It was different this time. Sharper, more desperate. It felt like claws tearing at something deep inside Kael, and the echo slammed into her with the force of a physical blow. Her vision blurred. Black spots danced in front of her eyes. The sounds of the courtyard faded into a distant roar. She could feel him. She could feel his wolf. It was breaking free. The basket slipped from her numb fingers. Her knees buckled. The last thing she felt before the darkness swallowed her whole was a distant, desperate howl that seemed to come not from the forest, but from inside her own head. Consciousness returned in fragments. The clean, sharp scent of healing herbs, the feeling of a soft blanket, the low murmur of a voice. She blinked her eyes open, expecting the lumpy cot of her Omega bunk. Instead, she saw the familiar wooden ceiling of the pack infirmary. The pack healer, an old woman named Lyra, was tending to her. But it was the other figure in the room that made her breath catch. He stood in the shadows near the door, a silhouette of immense size and power. Kael. He looked like hell. His face was drawn, exhaustion carved into the sharp planes of his cheeks. His golden eyes held a haunted, desperate light. He hadn't just brought her here, he had been drawn here. He had felt her collapse just as she had felt his struggle, his public rejection, his cold words. They were all a lie. A desperate, foolish lie. The bond wasn't broken. It was just wounded, and the chain that tied their souls together was still horribly, undeniably intact. Chapter 8. Whispers in a Bloodline. Her recovery in the quiet solitude of the infirmary was a strange sort of truce. For the first time in weeks, the agonizing echoes of the bond subsided to a manageable ache. Kael stayed away, and the distance provided a fragile peace. Elara became her lifeline to the world, visiting every day with pack gossip and stolen sweets. On the third day, she came not with food, but with a small, cloth-wrapped bundle. "They cleared out your old room," Elara whispered, glancing nervously toward the door. "To make space for the new trainees. I found this. It was tucked under a loose floorboard, the same one you used." Her friend's eyes were full of a hesitant sympathy. "I think it was your mother's." Sera unwrapped the cloth. Inside was a small, leather-bound journal, its cover worn smooth with time. It smelled faintly of pressed flowers and old paper. Her hands trembled as she opened it. The pages were filled with her mother's elegant, looping script, but the words were a puzzle. She wrote of moon-touched blood and the duties of an anchor. There were strange diagrams of constellations and cryptic passages about a wolf spirit being a fire that could either warm a soul or burn it to ash. It made little sense, but it painted a picture of a woman steeped in an old magic, a lore that was completely alien to the practical, brutal traditions of the Black Moon Pack. Her mother hadn't just been an outsider, she had been something else. Just as she was trying to decipher a passage about a blessed curse, the door to the infirmary opened, and a woman who radiated cold authority swept inside. It was Elder Maeve, Kael's mother. She was tall and slender, with silver-streaked dark hair pulled back in an intricate braid. Her face was beautiful but severe, her golden eyes a paler, colder version of her son's. She moved with the silent grace of a predator. "Leave us," she commanded the healer, her voice soft but laced with steel. The old woman bowed her head and scurried out. Maeve's icy gaze settled on Sera. There was no sympathy there, only judgment. "I see you are recovering." Sera clutched the journal to her chest. "What do you want?" "I want to make something perfectly clear," the elder said, her voice dropping. "You are a danger to my son. I do not know what trick of fate brought you to him, but you are an anchor tied to his neck, pulling him down into the depths." Sera flinched. An anchor. The same word from her mother's journal. "This bond you have," Maeve continued, taking a step closer, "it has amplified his curse. Every time you defy it, every time you cause him turmoil, his wolf grows stronger, more feral. He fights for control every single moment, and it is a battle you are making him lose." Her expression was a mask of maternal fury. "Whatever happened between you, whatever foolish claim his wolf made in a moment of weakness, it ends now. You will stay away from him. For his sake, and for the future of this pack, you will sever this completely." Her words were sharp, cruel, and logical from a certain point of view. But there was something else simmering beneath the surface, a strange, personal venom that felt less like a mother's protection and more like a desperate, fearful cover-up. It was the look of someone hiding a terrible secret. "Get out," Sera whispered, her voice shaking. Maeve's lips thinned into a bloodless line. She gave Sera one last, lingering look of pure disdain before turning and sweeping from the room. Sera was left alone in the sudden silence, the elder's threat hanging in the air like poison, her mother's mysterious journal a heavy weight in her lap. She was trapped in a web of secrets she couldn't understand, with the terrifying certainty that Kael's curse and her own family's past were tangled together in a terrible, deliberate lie. Chapter 9. An Offer in the Shadows. Returning to the Omega quarters was like stepping back into a bad dream, but something inside Sera had shifted. The journal, with its cryptic clues, had planted a seed of curiosity. Maeve's visit, with its cold venom, had sparked a fire of defiance. She was still a prisoner, still an outcast, but she was no longer just a passive victim of her fate. She was a girl with questions, and questions were a dangerous thing. The security around the Omega Wing was a joke, a clear statement of how little the pack valued its inhabitants. So, when a shadow detached itself from the corner of her tiny room one night, she wasn't entirely surprised. She was, however, terrified. He didn't make a sound, but the air crackled with a power that was sleek and predatory. Different from Kael's raw elemental force. This was smoother, colder, like polished obsidian. When he stepped into the thin beam of moonlight from her window, she saw a man who was dangerously handsome with silver blonde hair and eyes the color of a winter sky. He smiled, a slow, charming curve of his lips that didn't reach his eyes. She knew, with chilling certainty, who he was. Alpha Riker. "Sera," he said, his voice a low, pleasant murmur. It was a sound designed to soothe, but it made every nerve in her body scream in alarm. "I apologize for the intrusion, but I've been wanting to meet the she-wolf who has caused such a stir." She backed away until she hit the cold stone wall, her heart hammering. "What do you want?" His smile widened. He took a step closer, radiating a confidence that was both alluring and deeply unsettling. "I saw what he did to you, in the Great Hall. A rather public and brutal display. No true alpha would ever treat his mate that way." He paused, letting the words sink in. "No one should ever treat you that way." He spoke to the deepest, most wounded part of her. He saw her not as a traitor's daughter or a curse's mistake, but as a victim of injustice. It was a dangerously seductive tactic. "You don't have to stay here," he continued, his voice dropping to a conspiratorial whisper. "In this hovel, scorned by a pack that was never worthy of you, and rejected by an alpha who is too weak to control his own wolf. There are other packs. My pack, for instance. We value strength. We value passion. We would see you as a queen, not as an outcast. The offer hung in the air, shimmering and beautiful. A way out, not just an escape, but a promotion, safety, respect, power, and a subtle promise of revenge. Everything she had ever dreamed of, handed to her on a silver platter. Why shouldn't she take it? What loyalty did she owe to the people who had made her life a living hell? For a dizzying moment, she was tempted. The vision of it, walking beside this handsome, powerful alpha looking down on the shocked faces of Lyra and Maeve and all the others, was intoxicating. She looked into Riker's cold, beautiful eyes, and as she did, she felt a familiar, distant jolt. It was a spike of pure, possessive rage, thrumming along the frayed, invisible line that still connected her to Kael, her alpha. The thought was involuntary, instinctual. He knew. His wolf knew another alpha was near her, and it was going insane. In that instant, the illusion shattered. Kael's bond, for all its pain and torment, was real. It was a primal, chaotic truth. Riker's offer, for all its polished charm, was a lie. He didn't see her. He saw a tool, a weapon to use against his rival, a prize to be won. "No," she said. The word was quiet, but it was solid, unbreakable. Riker's charming smile finally vanished. His face became a mask of cold fury. "A pity," he hissed, the pleasant murmur gone, replaced by the snarl of a predator. But an alpha always gets what he wants. He took a step back, melting into the shadows from which he came. "I will have you, Sera, with or without your permission." Chapter 10. A Poisoned Kiss. Riker's threat lingered in her small room like a poison, long after his shadowy form had vanished. He hadn't just made a promise. He had declared a hunt, and she was the prey. The terror was a cold, sharp thing, but beneath it, a new feeling was taking root, a defiant, burning anger. This wasn't just about her anymore. Riker's presence threatened the entire pack, and as much as she hated to admit it, that now included her. She had to warn Kael. Pride be damned. Survival came first. Breaking his decree to stay away was surprisingly easy, because the bond, however damaged, acted as her compass. It pulled her through the sleeping pack house, a faint, insistent tugging in her soul that led her directly to the heart of his power, his study. The door was ajar. She slipped inside without a sound. He was standing by the large window, staring out at the moonlit forest. He looked like a king surveying a broken kingdom. The tension in his shoulders was a testament to the war he was constantly fighting. When he turned and saw her, his golden eyes flared with a complex storm of emotions, shock, anger, and a raw, possessive relief that he couldn't hide. "What are you doing here?" he growled, though the sound held no real heat. "I told you, he was here." She cut him off, her voice a shaky whisper. "Riker, he was in my room." The change in him was instantaneous. The weariness vanished, replaced by a stillness so absolute it was more terrifying than any rage. The temperature in the room seemed to drop 10 degrees. What did he want? The question was soft, lethal. "He offered me a place in his pack," she said, watching his face carefully. "He offered me protection, revenge." A muscle in his jaw jumped, a single violent twitch. "And what did you say?" "I said no." The coiled tension in his shoulders eased, but only by a fraction. He finally moved, crossing the room in 3 long strides until he was standing before her. He was so close she could feel the heat rolling off him, could smell that intoxicating scent of pine and storm. He was fighting something, his hands clenching and unclenching at his sides. "Why?" he finally asked, his voice rough with an emotion she couldn't name. "Why wouldn't you go with him? He could give you a better life than this." "Because he's a liar," she shot back. "And because you're an idiot if you think this is just about me anymore. He wants to start a war and he's going to use me to do it." Her frustration boiled over. "Why didn't you tell me I was a target? Because I thought I could protect you, he roared, the sound ripping from him, full of fury and self-loathing. He slammed a fist against the wall beside her head, the impact shuddering through the stone. She flinched but stood her ground. I rejected you to make you worthless in his eyes, to make you invisible. But it didn't work. He leaned in, his forehead resting against the wall, trapping her. His voice dropped to a broken, ragged whisper. It's the curse, Sera. You don't understand what it really is. Then make me understand, she pleaded, her anger softening in the face of his raw pain. He finally looked at her, his golden eyes shimmering with a terrible, tragic truth. My wolf, and it isn't just unstable. It feeds on emotion. Strong emotion. The stronger the feeling, the more powerful and uncontrollable it becomes. He took a shaky breath. Rage is easy. I can control that. But joy, hope, love, those are the things that break the cage. The confession hung between them, a devastating weight. The bond, he continued, his voice barely audible. It magnifies everything. My instinct to protect you, the pull I feel when you're near, this feeling in my chest when I look at you. He choked on the words. It's all fuel for the beast. It's poison. The closer I allow myself to get to you, the more I would feel for you, and the less control I would have. He finally met her eyes, and the despair in them shattered her heart. Don't you see? For me to love you would be a death sentence, for both of us. The truth was a poisoned kiss, sealing their fate. He pushed off the wall, but neither of them moved away. They stood inches apart, trapped in an impossible gravity. He slowly lifted a hand, his fingers hesitating just before they brushed her cheek. A single forbidden touch. A jolt of lightning shot through her. He snatched his hand back as if he'd been burned, a tormented growl tearing from his throat. The one thing that could heal their souls was the very thing that would destroy them. Chapter 11. Sins of the Father. Kael's confession echoed in Sera's mind, replaying itself over and over. Loving you would be a death sentence. The words should have been a final warning, a reason to run faster and farther than ever before. Instead, they became a key that unlocked a new way of seeing everything. She retreated to the cold solitude of her room, her mother's journal clutched in her hands. She read the cryptic passages again, but this time they weren't just nonsense. The anchor's duty is to soothe the raging fire. Moon-touched blood can stabilize a storm-tossed soul. Her mother hadn't been writing fairy tales. She had been writing a manual for a condition she must have known intimately. The thought was a spark in the darkness. What if Sera wasn't the fuel for Kael's fire? What if she was meant to be the rain? This new, dangerous hope propelled her into action. She needed answers, not riddles. She needed history. With Alara acting as a lookout, Sera slipped into the pack's dusty archives under the pretense of an Omega's cleaning duty. The air was thick with the scent of decaying paper and forgotten secrets. She wasn't sure what she was looking for, but she started with the records from the year her life had fallen apart. The year her father was branded a traitor. The official story was that her father, Beta Alistair, had sold pack secrets to a rival clan, leading to a bloody ambush on their borders. But as she scanned the patrol ledgers from that fateful month, the official story began to unravel. Her father's signature was on a patrol assignment that placed him 200 miles away on the Western Ridge, a direct order from the Alpha at the time, Kael's father, Valerius. He couldn't have been at the eastern border to commit the betrayal. It was impossible. The records had been forged. Her heart hammered against her ribs. He was innocent. Her father was innocent. Driven by a frantic energy, she pushed deeper into the archives, into the section reserved for the old Alphas. Tucked away behind a stack of tax records, she found it. A heavy, leather-bound tome that felt cold to the touch and smelled faintly of ozone and dried blood. It wasn't a history book. It was a grimoire. Her fingers, stained with dust, trembled as she opened it. The pages were filled with descriptions of dark, forbidden rituals. And then she saw it. A ritual for bloodline transference. It was a way to steal the innate power of another family line and absorb it into your own. It promised immense strength, the power of two bloodlines in one alpha. But the ritual was specific. It required a catalyst of great emotional turmoil, an act of profound betrayal, and a willing sacrifice. The grimoire also contained a stark warning. If the ritual was performed imperfectly, or if the stolen power was not compatible, it would result in a devastating curse. The stolen magic would turn feral, a raging, uncontrollable beast forever at war with its host. At the bottom of the page was a single, spidery notation in Alpha Valerius's handwriting. It was a date. The date her mother died. The same week her father was framed. The world tilted on its axis, the dusty air of the archives suffocating her. It all crashed together with the force of a tidal wave. Valerius wanted power. He had targeted her mother's moon-touched bloodline, the line of anchors. He needed a betrayal, so he framed his own loyal beta, her father. He needed a sacrifice, and her mother had willingly given her life, perhaps in a desperate attempt to stop the ritual or protect her family. The curse that tormented Kael wasn't some random affliction from the fates. It was the corrupted, stolen power of her own ancestors, a sickness passed down from a guilty, power-hungry father to his innocent son. She stumbled back, the dusty tome falling from her hands with a heavy thud. Her entire life, her father's shame, her mother's death, Kael's curse, it was all a lie built on the foundation of a monstrous sin. The bond between her and Kael wasn't a cruel twist of fate. It was a legacy of blood and fire, an ancient debt come due. Chapter 12. The First Bite of War. Before the full weight of the revelation could even settle in her soul, a sound shattered the quiet afternoon. A frantic, clanging bell. The alarm. An attack. Sera's blood ran cold. She dropped the records and ran from the archives, her heart pounding a frantic rhythm against her ribs. Panic was a living thing in the corridors of the pack house. Wolves shouted, running for weapons, their faces a mixture of fear and fury. Sera was pushed and shoved in the chaos, a ghost no one saw. She heard snippets of information. Rogues. No, it's a pack banner. The Northern Patrol was hit. Then she heard the name that made her stomach clench. It's Riker's banner, the Silver Claws! She pushed through the crowd, a single desperate thought driving her. Find Kael. She found him in the main courtyard, a whirlwind of command in the center of the storm. He was already directing warriors, his alpha presence a calming, focusing force amidst the chaos. When his golden eyes landed on her, they widened for a second, but there was no time for questions. A wounded warrior stumbled into the courtyard, clutching a bloody arm. Alpha! It wasn't a full invasion, it was a raid, fast, brutal. They took prisoners. Warriors? Kael demanded, his voice a low growl. The man shook his head, his face pale. No, Alpha, not warriors. They went for the West Wing, the kitchens, the laundry. His eyes found Sera's, and his expression filled with a terrible, dawning pity. They took the young ones. They took Alara. The world narrowed to a single point. Alara. Her friend. Her only friend. Riker's threat echoed in her mind. I will have you. This wasn't a random act of war. This was a message, sent directly to her. He was showing her that Kael couldn't protect anyone she cared about. He was isolating her, trying to break her will, proving that her only safe option was him. Something inside Sera, something that had been beaten down and forced into silence for years, finally snapped. The fear, the shame, the helplessness, it all burned away, forged into a single sharp point of cold, clear rage. They had taken her friend. They had attacked her pack. Because in that moment, she felt a fierce, possessive ownership of this place and these people, even the ones who had hurt her. Her entire life, her instinct had been to run from pain. But now, the pain was a fire, and it was finally pointing her in the right direction. She was done running. She strode through the chaos right up to Kael, ignoring the shocked looks from the other warriors. He was about to give an order when he saw her face, and he stopped. The truth about their fathers was a silent, screaming thing between them, a history they would have to face later. But right now, there was only the present. "I'm not hiding," she said, her voice quiet but ringing with a strength she didn't know she possessed. The ground was littered with the wounded, the air thick with the smell of blood and fear, but she had never felt more certain. "I'm not running." She met his blazing golden eyes, her own reflecting a new, unshakable resolve. "They took my friend. This is my fight now." She took a deep breath. "Tell me how to help." Chapter 13. The Anchor and the Storm. The truth about their shared past didn't fix anything. It just gave their broken pieces a name. Following that bloody raid, a tense, fragile alliance formed between them in the shadows of the pack house. Sera showed Kael the grimoire, showed him her mother's journal, and for the first time, he saw the full scope of the cage his father's ambition had built around him. He didn't want her help. His pride was a beast all its own. But he was an alpha with captured pack members, and she was the only key he had. So he agreed to train her. Not in fighting, but in control. They met in a secluded clearing deep in the woods, a place where the trees grew so thick they blotted out the sky, creating a perpetual twilight. The air was cool and smelled of moss and secrets. "My mother called it being an anchor," she explained, her voice soft in the heavy silence. She clutched the old journal to her chest. "She wrote that our bloodline can soothe the storm in another's soul, that we can ground a feral spirit." Kael stood opposite her, his arms crossed over his massive chest. He looked like a storm contained, his golden eyes burning with a mixture of skepticism and raw, desperate hope. "And how exactly do you plan to do that? Sing it a lullaby?" Despite the sarcasm, his question was genuine. He was lost. I don't know," she admitted, her frustration showing. "The journal is all riddles. It talks about resonance, about matching the frequency of the soul." She looked up at him, her gaze unflinching. "I think I have to get close to it, to your wolf." The very idea was madness, and they both knew it. Getting close was the one thing he had fought to avoid, because proximity was the fuel for his curse. He took a deep, shuddering breath, the air whistling between his teeth. "Fine," he growled, the word a surrender. "Try." He closed his eyes. The change began subtly. A low growl rumbled in his chest, a vibration she could feel in the soles of her feet. The air around him grew heavy, electric with power. His hands clenched into fists, his knuckles turning white. This was his daily battle, the constant grinding effort to keep the beast at bay. Following an instinct she didn't know she possessed, Sera took a hesitant step forward. She reached out a trembling hand, not toward the man, but toward the invisible, raging thing inside him. The moment her fingers brushed the sleeve of his jacket, a jolt of pure, chaotic energy slammed into her. It was a vision, a feeling, a whirlwind of fury, of pain, of a desperate loneliness so profound it stole her breath. It was his wolf, and it was in agony. Instead of pulling back, she pushed through the psychic onslaught. She focused on the feeling of the cool earth beneath her feet, on the steady beat of her own heart, on the cryptic words from the journal. Be the calm in the chaos. Be the anchor in the storm. She didn't try to fight the wolf's rage. She simply absorbed it. She let its frantic energy flow into her, and she sent back a wave of quiet, steady calm. Kael gasped, his eyes flying open. The feral gold was warring with the man's desperate gaze. "Sera, stop," he choked out, his voice strained. "It's too much." But it wasn't. For the first time, he wasn't fighting the storm alone. The bond between them, once a source of pain, was now a conduit. The raging fire in his soul met the cool river of hers. The growling in his chest softened. The electric tension in the air eased. He swayed on his feet, his control returning. But the effort had cost them both. He looked at her, truly looked at her, and the walls around his heart crumbled. The alpha, the curse, the pack, it all faded away, leaving only a man and a woman, bound by a legacy of pain and a spark of impossible hope. He reached for her, his movements no longer hesitant. His hand cupped her jaw, his thumb stroking her cheek with a reverence that made her tremble. "You," he whispered, his voice thick with wonder. "You quiet the storm." The world narrowed to the space between them. The air was thick with unspoken words, with years of loneliness, with a desire so powerful it was a physical force. He lowered his head, his lips just a breath from hers. This was it, the moment the world had been trying to prevent. A claim born not of instinct, but of dawning, terrifying love. A twig snapped in the woods behind them. They sprang apart as if burned, the spell shattered. Marcus, Kael's beta, stepped into the clearing, his face a mask of concern that didn't quite reach his eyes. "Alpha," he said, his gaze flicking between them. "Scouts have a location on Riker's camp. It's time to go." Chapter 14. The Price of Rescue. The raid was a symphony of silent, coordinated fury. Kael led a small, elite team of his most trusted warriors, with Sera moving in their shadow. Her role wasn't to fight, but to be the secret weapon, the anchor that would keep her alpha from spiraling into a feral rage in the heat of battle. They moved through the moonless forest like ghosts, their paws making no sound on the damp earth. The enemy camp was a festering wound in the heart of the woods, a collection of crude tents lit by the flickering orange glow of campfires. The metallic scent of blood and unwashed bodies hung heavy in the air. They could see the prisoners. Elara was among them, tied to a post with several other young wolves, their faces pale with terror. Kael gave the signal. The attack was a blur of black fur and flashing claws. Kael was a force of nature, a whirlwind of controlled destruction. He fought with a brutal efficiency, but Sera could feel the beast churning just beneath his skin, roaring for release at the sight of his captured pack. She stayed close, a silent, calming presence at his back. She reached out through the bond, not with words, but with a feeling, a steady, grounding hum that kept the fire in his soul from becoming an inferno. It was working. For the first time in his life, he was fighting with his wolf, not against it. The Silverclaw warriors were caught completely by surprise, their arrogance their downfall. The fight was short, bloody, and decisive. As his warriors freed the prisoners, Kael cornered the camp's commander, a massive brute with a scarred face. "Where is Riker?" Kael snarled, his voice a low, deadly growl. The commander just spat a wad of blood and laughed. "He's not here, Black Moon. This was just a test, to see how far you'd come for your little Omega bitch." Before Kael could rip his throat out, a new scent hit the air. Wolfsbane. A cloud of the toxic, burning powder erupted from the edge of the camp. The Black Moon warriors choked, their powerful senses turning against them, the poison searing their lungs. It was an ambush, a trap. "Fall back!" Kael roared, his command cutting through the chaos. They retreated with the rescued prisoners, but it was a chaotic, painful withdrawal. Two of his best warriors were hit with silver-tipped arrows, their pained howls echoing through the trees. They had won the skirmish, but the victory felt hollow, tainted by the enemy's foresight. Someone had warned them. Someone knew they were coming. They made it back to their own territory as the sun began to rise, the wounded leaning heavily on their comrades. Sera's heart ached for their losses, but a cold knot of suspicion was tightening in her gut. The ambush had been too perfect, the timing too precise. Later, as the pack healer tended to the wounded, Kael stood with Marcus on the overlook, the beta's face a mask of grim concern. "We were lucky to get out with that many," Marcus said, shaking his head. "Their planning was flawless. It's like they knew our every move." Sera watched them from a distance, the pieces clicking into place with a sickening certainty. She remembered Marcus's face in the clearing, the concern that never reached his eyes. She remembered his convenient arrival, interrupting a moment of profound connection between her and Kael. He had been the only one who knew their exact location, the only one who knew they were ready to strike. Kael turned, his golden gaze meeting hers across the courtyard. He saw the dawning horror on her face, the accusation she didn't need to speak. He looked from her to the man standing beside him, the man who had been his father's beta, the man he had trusted like a brother. He looked at Marcus, and for the first time, he truly saw him. The subtle shiftiness in his eyes, the scent of a lie clinging to him like cheap perfume. The betrayal was a quiet, devastating blow, far more damaging than any silver arrow. The enemy wasn't just at their gates, he was standing right beside the throne. Chapter 15. The Luna's Choice. The discovery of Marcus's betrayal shattered the pack's morale. He was apprehended, his confession a bitter poison that spread through the ranks. He claimed Kael's curse was a weakness that would doom them all, that Riker was the future. His words, though spoken by a traitor, found fertile ground in the pack's fear. The fault lines that had been hiding beneath the surface cracked wide open. The pack was broken, divided between those loyal to their cursed alpha and those who saw him as a liability. They were weaker, more vulnerable than ever before. Riker, sensing the fracture, did not wait. He didn't send warriors or scouts. He sent a single messenger, an elder from a neutral pack who carried an official proclamation that was read aloud in the tense, silent Great Hall. The terms were simple: unconditional surrender. Riker would absorb the Black Moon Pack, sparing all who bent the knee. He would take their territory, their resources, their history, and he would take his Luna. The proclamation demanded that Sera be delivered to him at sunup on the Western Ridge, an offering to seal the new alliance. If she was not there, he would consider it a declaration of war, and he would march on them with the full force of his army and wipe them from the face of the earth. The hall erupted into chaos. Shouts of outrage mixed with terrified whispers of surrender. "We can't win!" someone cried. "He'll slaughter us!" another yelled. "We can't hand her over!" a loyalist roared back. Sera stood beside the dais, the pack's fear and anger washing over her. She watched Kael, who stood like a stone statue amidst the storm, his face an unreadable mask of cold fury. He was being backed into a corner, forced to choose between his pack and his mate, the very mate he had already publicly rejected. Any choice he made would tear them apart. But they had forgotten one thing. They had forgotten to ask her. She stepped forward. Her movement was small, but it cut through the noise like a blade. The hall fell silent, all eyes turning to the disgraced Omega girl who was the cause of all this turmoil. She walked past Kael and stood at the very edge of the dais, looking down at the sea of conflicted, terrified faces. She was no longer the scared girl who scrubbed pots in the kitchen. She was the daughter of an anchor, the key to a curse, and the object of an alpha's war. "You're all asking the wrong question," she said, her voice clear and steady, ringing with an authority no one had ever heard from her before. "You ask if our alpha should give me away. You ask if we should fight a war we might not win." She let her gaze sweep across the room, meeting the eyes of her tormentors and her few friends. "But you haven't asked what I choose." She turned, her back to the pack, and faced Kael. She looked into his tormented golden eyes, the eyes of the man who thought loving her would destroy him. She saw the storm of his wolf, the weight of his father's sins, the burden of his crown, and she was not afraid. She reached up, her hand gently touching the faded mark on her neck, the brand that had once been her prison. "This bond, it is not a mistake. It is not a curse." She took a deep breath, her voice ringing with absolute certainty. "And it is not the fate's choice to make." In front of the entire shocked pack, she took the final step toward him. "I choose you, Kael, not the alpha, not the beast. You." She laid her hand flat on his chest, right over his heart, a mirror of the moment he had first claimed her. "I am your mate. I am your anchor." Her voice dropped to a fierce, possessive whisper that was for him alone, yet echoed through the silent hall. "And I will be your Luna." It wasn't a question. It was a declaration. A claim. Her claim. A choice made in the face of certain death. An answer to Riker's demand, and a vow that bound their broken souls together, ready to face the dawn. Chapter 16. The Sound of Silver. The dawn broke, cold and gray, over a pack that was no longer just a pack, but an army. The air in the Black Moon camp crackled with a grim, nervous energy, a tense hum of sharpened claws and whispered prayers. Sera stood beside Kael in the command tent, a map of their territory spread out on the table between them. She was no longer an outcast hiding in the shadows. She was the Luna, her presence at his side a silent, defiant answer to Riker's proclamation. Kael's golden eyes met hers over the map, and in them she saw not a monster or a curse, but a king ready to defend his home. He was terrified. She could feel it through the bond, a deep, thrumming fear of losing his people, of losing her. But his fear was overshadowed by a resolve as hard as mountain stone. The attack came not with a roar, but with the subtlety of a serpent. Riker's forces didn't launch a full frontal assault. They used the forest, their silver and black banners appearing like ghosts among the trees, striking at their flanks with brutal, tactical precision. The sounds of battle erupted, the clash of bodies, the snarls of wolves, the high, chilling whistle of silver-tipped arrows. Kael moved to the front line, a black-furred whirlwind of righteous fury. He was magnificent, a force of nature unleashed, and Sera stayed as close as she dared, her heart pounding in her throat. She became his anchor in the swirling chaos of combat. When a wave of feral rage threatened to overwhelm him as he saw one of his warriors fall, she pushed a wave of calm through the bond, a silent whisper of "I am here." He faltered for a second, his massive head turning to look at her, and in that instant, the bloodlust in his eyes receded, replaced by the sharp focus of the Alpha. But Riker was a master strategist. He had anticipated Kael's strength, and he had planned for it. This initial assault wasn't the main attack. It was bait. Just as the Black Moon warriors began to push the enemy back, a new force appeared on the ridge. Another legion of silver claw wolves, larger and more heavily armed, with Riker himself at their head. His silver blonde hair shone like a malevolent star in the dim light of the battlefield. The first wave had been a distraction, meant to draw Kael into the open. It was a trap. Riker didn't bother with the other warriors. He launched himself down the ridge, a silver streak of single-minded purpose, aimed directly at his rival. The two Alphas met in the center of the battlefield with a sound like thunder, a brutal, earth-shaking collision of power. They were a maelstrom of black and silver fur, of tooth and claw, each a force capable of tearing the other to shreds. Sera felt Kael's rage, pure and untamed, and she tried to ground him, but the raw violence of the Alpha clash was too much. It was a storm she could not contain. Seeing their Alpha locked in combat, Riker's archers took their positions. "Now!" a commander roared. A volley of arrows, their tips gleaming with the deadly white of silver, rained down upon them. Kael saw them at the last second. He did the only thing his soul would allow. With a guttural roar, he disengaged from Riker, spinning around and covering Sera's body with his own. The sound of the arrows hitting him was a series of sickening, wet thuds. He cried out, a sound of pure, unadulterated agony that tore through the battlefield and ripped a matching scream from Sera's own throat. He staggered, his massive form trembling. The great black wolf seemed to collapse in on itself, shrinking, shifting, until it was no longer a beast of myth, but a broken, bleeding man, riddled with silver-shafted arrows who fell at her feet. The battle line shattered into chaos. All she could hear was the sound of her own heart breaking as loyal warriors grabbed them both, dragging them back toward the den in a desperate, hopeless retreat. Chapter 17. A Mother's Venom. The infirmary smelled of blood, silver poison, and despair. Kael lay on a cot, his powerful form frighteningly still. He was trapped in his human body, the silver preventing his wolf from healing him, the poison a fire that was slowly, methodically eating him from the inside out. Each of his ragged breaths was a victory. Sera sat beside him, her hand gripping his, trying to pour her own strength, her own calm, into him through the bond. But it was like trying to fill a shattered cup. His life force, once a raging bonfire, was now a flickering, guttering candle flame. The door creaked open, and Elder Maeve swept in. Her face was a mask of perfect, tragic grief, but her eyes were as cold and hard as a winter frost. She looked at her dying son, and then her gaze fell on Sera, full of a chilling, absolute blame. "Look at what you have done," Maeve whispered, her voice a silken thread of venom. "I warned you. I told you that you would be the end of him. You have made him weak." Sera flinched but didn't release Kael's hand. "He was protecting his pack. He was protecting me." "He was a fool," Maeve hissed, stepping closer. "Blinded by a foolish bond that his father's curse should have made impossible. This obsession with you. It has diluted his focus, drained his strength, and left him a broken thing on a healer's cot." She looked down at Kael, a flicker of genuine pain crossing her features before being replaced by a chilling resolve. An alpha cannot afford such weakness. The pack cannot survive it. Sera's blood ran cold. There was a finality in the elder's voice, a sense of an endgame being reached. "What are you talking about?" Maeve finally looked at her, a faint, cruel smile touching her lips. "I did what a mother must. I did what an elder of the pack must. I chose survival over sentiment." Her confession was calm, her conviction absolute. "I knew Kael's honor would not let him surrender you to Riker, and I knew his love for you would make him reckless in battle. I gave Riker our plans. I told him how to set the trap." The words were so monstrous, so unnatural, that for a moment Sera couldn't comprehend them. A mother, betraying her own son to his most hated enemy. You did this to him?" she choked out, her heart seizing in her chest. "I did this for him," Maeve countered, her voice rising with a fanatical passion. "To save him from himself, to save this pack from his weakness. Riker is strong, he is stable, he will bring order, he will take you away and the source of the infection will be gone. My son will be free, he will heal, he will be a proper alpha again." It was a logic so twisted, so poisoned by a warped sense of love and duty, that it was the very definition of madness. Maeve truly believed that by destroying her son's life, she was saving it. "He will be saved," Maeve finished, her voice dropping back to a cold whisper. "One way or another." She turned and glided from the room. A moment later, a new sound began outside the infirmary door. Not the sound of an external enemy, but the clash of steel and the snarls of wolves fighting wolves. The sickening sound of a civil war. Maeve hadn't just betrayed her son on the battlefield. She had just launched a coup inside his own home. Chapter 18. The quiet end of the world chaos erupted. A civil war in microcosm fought in the stone corridors outside the infirmary. Loyalists against Maeve's faction. The sounds of the desperate, bloody struggle were a muffled backdrop to the greater, quieter battle being lost within the room. Sera was trapped, a prisoner beside the man she loved, while their world tore itself apart just a few feet away. But soon, the sounds of the fighting began to fade, not because they were stopping, but because a more terrifying silence was growing inside her. The bond. The thrumming, electric, chaotic connection to Kael that had become the center of her universe was fading. The raging storm of his soul, the bonfire of his life force, it was all weakening, the pulses growing faint, thready, and slow. The silver poison, the grievous wounds, and now, the profound shock of his own mother's betrayal. It was a blow from which his spirit could not recover. He was letting go. He was slipping away. Sera's breath hitched, a sob catching in her throat. She tried to push her energy through the bond, a desperate, frantic plea. "Stay. Please stay with me. Don't go." but it was like shouting into the wind. Her anchor was useless because the ship it was tied to was sinking into a dark, silent abyss. All her life, her one defining instinct had been to run. She had run from the shame of her father's name. She had run from the pack's scorn. She had tried to run from the very man whose hand was now growing cold in hers. But now, faced with the ultimate loss, she realized her greatest fear had changed. It wasn't the pain of being trapped or the agony of being hated. It was the vast, empty, silent terror of being the one left behind. The thought of this connection, this beautiful, terrible thing, going completely silent forever, that was a pain beyond comprehension. That was the quiet end of the world. Tears she hadn't realized she was crying streamed down her face, splashing onto his still hand. The fierce, defiant Luna who had claimed him in the Great Hall was gone, replaced by a broken girl on the edge of oblivion. She leaned over him, her forehead pressing against his, her body racked with shuddering sobs. The words were torn from a place deeper than her bones, a place she hadn't known existed until this very moment. "Don't leave me," she whispered, the prayer lost in the sounds of a dying battle. "Please, Kael, don't go." Her voice broke, the final, terrifying truth of her heart laid bare in the face of absolute loss. "I love you." She felt it then. A final, faint flicker through the bond, a bare whisper of his spirit against hers. And then, nothing. Absolute, profound stillness. At that exact moment, the fighting outside the door stopped. An eerie, unnatural silence fell over the entire packhouse. She was left alone in the devastating quiet, her universe having collapsed not with a roar, but with a final, unheard whisper. Chapter 19. The Blood of the Moon. The silence was a living death. In the hollow space where the bond had once raged and hummed, there was now only a void. Kael's hand was cold in hers, his chest still. Sera's world had ended, not with a bang, but with a final, defeated whisper. She was adrift in an ocean of quiet, her anchor gone. The infirmary door creaked open, not with the cold authority of Maeve, but with a frantic, desperate haste. It was Alara, her face streaked with dirt and tears, a handful of loyal warriors behind her. "They're contained," she gasped, rushing to Sera's side. "Maeve's traitors have surrendered. She's been taken to the cells." Alara's gaze fell upon Kael's still form, and the victory in her eyes died. "Oh, Sera." But Sera barely heard her. Her grief was a pressure chamber, squeezing out everything but the cold, hard fact of her loss. In her lap, her mother's journal lay open, a silent testament to a power that had come too late. Her tear-blurred eyes fell upon a line of script she hadn't understood before, a line that had been hidden beneath a passage about soothing a storm. When the fire gutters and the soul prepares for its final journey, only the anchor's heartblood can call it home. Heartblood. It wasn't a metaphor, it was an instruction. A final, desperate gambit written by a mother who knew this day might come for someone in her line. A choice. A sacrifice. Not a theft of power like the one Valerius had performed, but a gift of it. A transfer of her own life force to rekindle his. A wild, terrifying hope, sharp as a shard of glass, pierced through her grief. "Get me a healer's knife," she commanded, her voice raspy but firm. Alara stared at her, confused. "Sera, what are you— now?" Sera's voice cracked with an authority that stunned them all into silence. One of the warriors, his face grim, unsheathed a small silver blade and handed it to her without a word. Her hands didn't tremble. Her resolve was absolute. This was her purpose. This was the true meaning of being an anchor. It wasn't just to calm the storm, it was to become the lighthouse when the storm had passed, guiding the lost ship back to shore. She drew the blade across the palm of her hand, a deep, clean cut. Blood, bright and vital, welled up instantly. Ignoring the sting, she pressed her bleeding hand flat against Kael's chest, directly over his still heart. She closed her eyes, shutting out the worried faces of her friends, and focused on the void where the bond used to be. She didn't just offer her blood. She offered her soul. She poured all of her energy, all of her life, all of her desperate, newly realized love into him. "Come back," she pleaded into the silence. "Come home to me." It was like setting a match to a trail of gunpowder. A cool, silver light, soft as moonlight, bloomed from her hand, sinking into Kael's skin. The room filled with the scent of wildflowers and ozone. She felt a dizzying rush, her own life force draining away like sand through an hourglass, her body growing cold and weak. But as her strength faded, she felt something else. A flicker, a spark in the void. The bond, once silent, jolted back to life with a force that threw her head back with a gasp. It wasn't the raging, chaotic storm of before. It was a clear, steady, powerful current of pure life. She could feel his heart beat once. Then again, she could feel the silver poison receding from his veins, burned away by the pure magic of her blood. She slumped forward, her energy spent, the world turning gray at the edges. But before she fell, his hand, once cold and limp, closed around her wrist with surprising strength. His eyes flew open. The feral, cursed gold was gone, washed clean. For the first time, she looked into the clear, sane, brilliant gaze of the man himself. He looked at her hand still pressed to his chest, and then at the wound on her palm. He understood. He knew what she had sacrificed, and in his eyes, she saw her own love, mirrored back at her, 1,000 times brighter. Chapter 20. A Queen in Tatters. A day passed in a blur of healing, intense, whispered strategy. The Black Moon Pack was a ghost of its former self, a body ravaged by fever. Maeve was locked in the deepest cell, her betrayal a cancer that had left the pack's spirit sick and weak. Riker's army was a dark stain on their borders, a promise of the death that was coming with the next dawn. Despair was a physical shroud over the pack house, heavy and suffocating. It was into this despair that Sera walked. Weakened from her sacrifice, her steps were slow but deliberate as she entered the great hall. The few remaining warriors and pack members were gathered there, their faces gaunt, their eyes hollow. They looked like a people already defeated. When they saw her, they fell silent. They looked at her with a new, strange expression. A mixture of awe for the she-wolf who had saved their alpha, and fear of the magic she represented. She walked to the center of the hall, her tattered clothes and pale face a stark contrast to the power that now radiated from her. She was not the Omega Girl any longer. "I know you are afraid," she began, her voice quiet, but carrying to every corner of the silent hall. "We are outnumbered, we are wounded, and we have been betrayed by our own." She let them absorb the hard truths. She didn't offer them false hope. She offered them something better. For generations, this pack has lived under the shadow of a lie, a story of a cursed alpha and a traitorous beta. But the curse was never Kael's. It was his father's sin. And my father. My father was a hero who died protecting this pack from that sin. She told them everything, about Valerius, about the dark ritual, about her mother's sacrifice. She laid the truth of their history bare, a painful but necessary cleansing. "Riker offers you surrender. He offers you a life of service under his banner," she continued, her voice growing stronger. "And maybe that is the safe choice. But it is a choice to live in fear. I am not offering you safety. I am offering you a chance to fight for something new." She looked around at their faces, at the flicker of hope igniting in their tired eyes. "We will no longer be a pack of secrets and shadows. We will be a pack of truth. We will not fight to defend a poisoned legacy. We will fight to create a future we can be proud of." A figure appeared in the grand entrance to the hall. He leaned heavily on a carved wooden staff, but he stood tall. It was Kael, pale, scarred, but alive. His golden eyes, clear and sane, found Sera's across the room. The entire hall held its breath. He walked slowly, deliberately, to her side. His presence was a powerful, unspoken endorsement. He faced his pack, his people, his gaze sweeping over them. "My father left me a legacy of poison," he said, his voice raspy but ringing with a new, humble strength. "He left all of us a legacy of lies that has cost us too much." He turned his head and looked at Sera, his expression full of a love and reverence that silenced all doubt. "This Luna, she offers us a legacy of hope." He turned back to the pack. "I do not know if we will win this battle, but I know that I would rather die fighting beside her for a shred of truth than live a long life on a throne of lies." The silence that followed was profound. Then, a single scarred warrior near the front slowly, painfully, knelt to the ground. Another followed his lead, and then another, until the entire great hall was a sea of kneeling wolves, their heads bowed not just to their alpha, but to their Luna. They were no longer a broken people. They were an army, reborn in truth, ready for one last desperate fight. Chapter 21. The Calm Before the End. The command tent was the same, but the world had changed. A grim, focused resolve had replaced the frantic terror of before. Kael and Sera stood over the map, but they were not just an alpha and his mate. They were two halves of a single strategy, their minds linked by the clear, steady hum of the healed bond. "A frontal assault is suicide," Kael stated, his voice low. "Riker expects it. He has the numbers and the high ground." "Then we don't give him the fight he wants," Sera replied, her finger tracing a faint line on the old map. Her time in the archives had yielded more than just the truth of their past. "Here," she said, tapping a spot deep in the woods west of the ridge. "This is an old hunter's trail, not on any of the new maps. It leads to a series of narrow ravines, a choke point." Kael leaned in, his eyes narrowed in concentration. "He wouldn't be able to bring his full force to bear. We could funnel them, fight them on our terms." "It's a risk," she admitted. "But it's a better one than marching our people into a slaughter." He looked up from the map, his gaze meeting hers. For the first time, he wasn't just listening to her. He was seeing her as his strategic equal. A slow smile touched his lips, a genuine expression of admiration and pride. "A pack of truth," he murmured, quoting her words. "And strategy. I like it." After the plans were drawn and the warriors dispatched to their positions, a quiet calm fell over the tent. They were alone, two souls in the eye of a hurricane. The final battle was only hours away. There was no guarantee of survival, only the choice to face the end together. Kael reached out, his calloused fingers gently taking her hand. He turned it over, his thumb tracing the pale new scar that ran across her palm. "You saved me," he said, his voice thick with an emotion that went deeper than gratitude. It was awe. "No," she whispered, using her other hand to touch the mate mark on her neck, the brand that had once been a symbol of her captivity and was now a symbol of her choice. "We saved each other." The space between them vanished. He leaned down, and she rose to meet him. Their kiss was not the desperate, frantic collision of before. It was slow, deliberate, a tender exploration in the shadow of war. It was a kiss that held the memory of pain, the taste of sacrifice, and the profound, unspoken promise of a future they were willing to die for. It was a vow of love, sealed in the quiet moments before the end of the world. When they finally broke apart, they stood together, looking out the tent flap at the first, faint hint of dawn painting the eastern sky. Their warriors were in position. Their pack was ready. There was nothing left to say. The final battle was here. Chapter 22. Two halves of a howl. Dawn bled across the sky, a wounded smear of pink and orange. The battle began in the narrow ravine, a clash of tooth and claw in the half-light. The Black Moon Pack, using the terrain their Luna had found for them, fought with the ferocity of a cornered animal. They were outnumbered, but they were fighting on their own terms, turning the ravine into a brutal, claustrophobic death trap. Sera stood on a high ledge with a handful of guards, a vantage point from which she could see the whole chaotic tapestry of the fight. her heart hammered with every snarl, every cry of pain, her soul a taut wire connected directly to the alpha fighting at the heart of the fray. Riker, enraged at being outmaneuvered, finally forced his way to the front. He was a silver-furred demon, his eyes burning with a cold, ambitious fire. He ignored the warriors biting at his heels, his focus absolute, his target singular. He launched himself at Kael, and the final, brutal duel began. It was a battle of titans. The ground shook with their impact. But Kael was not at his full strength. The memory of the silver poison was a ghost in his muscles. Riker, fueled by a lifetime of ambition, was relentless. He landed a vicious blow, his claws tearing across Kael's shoulder, drawing a roar of pain from the black wolf. Sera felt it as if it were her own flesh, a searing, white-hot agony that made her gasp. Through the bond, she felt Kael's control flicker. The feral rage, the storm she knew so well, began to churn beneath the surface, threatening to consume him in his moment of weakness. The pack's defensive line wavered, their morale faltering as they saw their alpha stumble. This was it, the moment of truth. Sera didn't hesitate. She scrambled down the ledge, ignoring the panicked shouts of her guards. She ran into the heart of the battle, a small, determined figure against a backdrop of giants. She reached Kael's side, dodging a swipe from a silver claw warrior. He was staggering, his golden eyes beginning to glaze over with mindless fury. She slammed her scarred palm against his heaving, fur-covered side. This time she didn't just soothe, she didn't just calm, she pushed. She poured her very essence into him, her love, her resolve, her unshakable belief in the man beneath the beast. It was not a plea. It was a command. We do this together. The effect was instantaneous and electrifying. A visible shimmer of silver energy, like heat haze, enveloped them both. Kael's feral rage didn't vanish. It sharpened. It focused. The raw, chaotic power of his curse was suddenly given a purpose, a direction, guided by the unwavering calm of his anchor. His pain was forgotten. His exhaustion vanished. He was no longer a single, conflicted being, but one half of a perfect whole. They moved as one. His strength, her control, his fury, her focus. He was the storm, and she was the eye of the hurricane. He anticipated Riker's moves before they were made, because she could feel the rival Alpha's intent. She countered Riker's tactical feints, because Kael's instincts were now her own. They were a single, harmonious engine of destruction. Riker, for the first time, looked confused, baffled. He was no longer fighting a single, wounded Alpha. He was fighting a legend, a power he could not comprehend. The final blow was a blur of black fur and silver light. Kael's jaws, guided by a precision that was more Sera than him, closed around Riker's throat. It was over. As their defeated enemy's horn sounded a full retreat, Kael and Sera stood in the center of the bloody ravine. He was still in his wolf form, and she still had her hand pressed against his side. He turned his massive head and looked down at her, and from the chests of both the beast and the woman, a single victorious howl rose into the morning sky, a sound of two souls finally, completely, becoming one. Chapter 23. The Weight of a Crown. The journey back to the pack house was a grim, triumphant procession. They carried their wounded and honored their dead, but they walked with their heads held high. The surviving Silverclaw warriors were now their prisoners, their Alpha's defeat a testament to the Black Moon's impossible victory. The pack gathered in the Great Hall, no longer a fractured, terrified mob, but a unified body, their eyes fixed on the two figures who stood on the dais. They saw Kael, their Alpha, battle-scarred but clear-eyed, and they saw Sera, their Luna, her clothes torn and her face smudged with dirt, her hand resting on her Alpha's arm, a symbol of the quiet strength that had saved them all. The old hierarchy, built on fear and brute force, had died in the ravine. A new one, built on balance and truth, was being born. There was one last piece of the old world to deal with. "Bring her," Kael commanded, his voice quiet but echoing with an authority that was now whole, undisputed. The guards brought Elder Maeve from the cells. She was unrepentant, her face a mask of cold pride even in defeat. She looked at her son, at the woman beside him, and her eyes filled with a bitter scorn. "So the little Omega's magic saved you," she sneered. "You are weaker than I ever imagined." Kael looked at his mother, and Sera could feel the deep, profound grief that rolled through him. But there was no hesitation, no conflict, only a sad, final resolve. "My entire life," he said, his voice heavy with the weight of the past. "You told me my wolf was a curse, a sickness to be contained." He shook his head slowly. "You were wrong. The curse was never the wolf. It was the secrets, the lies, the poison that my father poured into our bloodline, a poison you helped conceal." He stepped forward, his gaze never leaving hers. "You are my mother. You gave me life, and I will not be the one to take yours." The entire hall held its breath. But the law is the law. You conspired with an enemy. You betrayed your alpha. You betrayed your pack. He took a deep, steadying breath. "You are hereby exiled. You will leave our lands by sundown and never return. You will live out the rest of your days alone, with nothing but the consequences of your choices for company." Maeve's cold facade finally cracked. A flicker of shock, of pain, crossed her features before she mastered it. Without another word, she turned and let the guards lead her away, a queen leaving her own castle for the last time. A great collective sigh of relief and release seemed to pass through the pack. The last of the poison had been drawn. The healing could finally begin. Later, Kael and Sera stood on the high balcony of the Alpha's wing, looking down at their battered, weary, but surviving people. The sounds of rebuilding were already beginning to echo from the courtyard. The public duties were done. The crown was secure. Now, all that remained was the private peace they had fought so hard to win. Chapter 24. A home in the Heart night fell, blanketing the Packlands in a profound and welcome peace. The scent of wood smoke and healing herbs drifted on the cool air. In the Alpha's quarters, the place that had once been Sera's gilded cage, a quiet fire crackled in the hearth, casting a warm, golden glow on the room. It was no longer a prison or a den. It was a sanctuary. All the battles were over. The external enemies were defeated. The internal traitors exiled. All the secrets were laid bare. There were no more ghosts, no more lies, no more curses hiding in the shadows. There was only the man and the woman, standing together in the quiet heart of their new world. Kael came to her, his movements full of a gentle reverence. He took her hands in his thumbs stroking the backs of her knuckles. His golden eyes, so often filled with storms and torment, were now as clear and calm as a summer sky. "The fates may have marked us," he said, his voice a low, soft rumble. "They may have tied our souls together with a thread of old magic and our father's sins." He lifted one of her hands and pressed a soft kiss to the scar on her palm. "But this..." He looked up, his gaze holding hers, full of a love so deep it was an ocean. "You and I, we chose this." "I chose you," she whispered, the words as true as her own heartbeat. Her hand went to the intricate, faded mark on her neck. It no longer felt like a brand of ownership, but a symbol of her journey, a testament to her choice. He lowered his head, his lips meeting hers. The kiss was a culmination of everything. It held the memory of their first, terrified meeting in the woods. It held the pain of his rejection and the agony of their separation. It held the heat of their shared battles and the quiet strength of their healed bond. It was a kiss of homecoming, a final, absolute surrender to a love that had been forged in fire and cleansed by sacrifice. This was their true claiming. Not an act of feral instinct in the moonlight, but a conscious, deliberate, and loving union of two souls who had found their other half. It was a quiet, passionate promise, sealed in the warmth of the firelight, a vow to build a future together, brick by brick, on the foundation of the truth they had fought so hard to uncover. The next morning, Sera awoke wrapped in his arms, the steady beat of his heart a soothing rhythm against her ear. For the first time, she felt no fear, no anxiety, only a profound sense of peace. She slipped out of bed and walked to the large window, looking out at the lands that were now her home. She saw the pack below, beginning the slow, arduous process of rebuilding. She saw the rising sun glinting off the stream at the border, the same stream she had once tried to cross in a desperate bid for freedom. She had dreamed of running away to a place where no one knew her name. But now, she knew a deeper truth. Home wasn't a place you ran to. It was a place you built, a place you fought for, a place you found not on a map, but in the heart of another. Her transformation was complete. She was not a Luna by fate. She was a Luna by choice, a queen who had earned her crown not through birthright, but through courage and love. And the man still sleeping in her bed was not a cursed beast, but a healed alpha who had found his ultimate strength, not in his power, but in his vulnerability. Their story was not a tragedy written by their ancestors, but a love song they were just beginning to compose.